August 31st, 1997. Diana is dead. People are saddened and they are furious. And much of their ire is directed at one entity in particular.
Attention shifted decisively towards the role the press and media had played in their mother's death.
Every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
The previous clip was Diana's brother, who minced no words when he let people know who he held responsible for his sister's death. British press was in survival mode. The reaction was swift, with the Mirror and the Sun seeing some of their biggest circulation drops in decades.
The press was sitting there in the dock in the court of public opinion, accused literally of murdering the princess. The clock was ticking. The press at that point was looking over the precipice into a fully fledged, deeply repressive privacy law.
Very quickly before we get into what happened next, doubts about if the press could truly regulate themselves had been around forever. This was a similar argument that had just taken on bigger meaning with the death of the People's Princess. Before the PCC, which is the Press Complaints Commission, which is no longer around, there is IPSO now, there was the Press Council, which was founded in 1953. And even back then, there was concern about this turning into state control of the media, which I agree is something to be concerned about. On the other side, people feared that this council was a way for the media to cover up after one another. The council was really tested in the 1980s when several papers breached the code of conduct. They were basically told, reform or we are going to create a government body to do so for you. So along came the PCC, or the Press Complaints Commission, and a new code of conduct, which was fully in place during the Diana years. After Diana's death, the PCC immediately holds an emergency meeting.
There's no longer a market in this country for pictures by the sort of photographers who persistently pursued Princess Diana.
They also agreed to extend the definition of private space to include public places where an individual might have a reasonable expectation of privacy.
They continue the narrative that this is a problem outside of the British media. Yes, they purchased the photos, but it was the foreign paparazzi who were getting the photos. And some of these codes of conduct now are kind of defunct given the change in technology. People have cell phones now. Things are posted all over the media. You don't have to go and stalk an individual to get the shot. This is just my opinion, but I think the media got off easy. The problems are new now, but some of the players are exactly the same. I don't think there are many examples of lessons learned here. But I also want to talk about something else. This is just from my research, it's my opinion, but I think what also helped the press was how much Prince Charles needed them at the time. The 90s were not a good decade for Charles. There were the leaked tapes with Camilla Parker Bowles, the Panorama interview where Diana said there were 3 of us in the marriage. He begins publicly dating Camilla, and then Diana dies. And very quickly you start seeing articles and opinion pieces questioning what kind of dad Charles is. There's talk about the monarchy skipping over Charles and going directly to William as the future king. Like, these sorts of stories and sentiments were going on way back then. But here's the other thing. At the time, Charles had a somewhat unconventional press secretary. His name was Mark Boland. I told you to remember this man because this is Guy Black, who was the director of the PCC at the time, who happened to be the longtime partner, now husband, of one Mark Boland. The director of the organization that regulates the press is literally in bed with the press secretary for the future king. Charles needed the press, in particular to rehab the image of Camilla, who Charles was besotted with. So in the late 90s, you have a deeply unpopular press and a deeply unpopular future king who really has an incentive to play nice with the press, to get buy-in as Camilla, as his future wife, queen perhaps. They both needed each other. Diana's death didn't stop any media game, certainly not from Prince Charles. In fact, I think there's more evidence that he leaned into it, especially under the tutelage and direction of his press secretary, Mark Boland. And just to add insult to injury when it comes to the PCC, during the Levinson inquiry into phone hacking in 2004, I'm reading this from my notes, during the inquiry, Lord Levinson asked Tim Toolman, director of the PCC from 2004 to 2009, Is the error everybody has made is that in calling the PCC a self-regulating body, it is believed that it is a regulator by the public, when it wasn't actually a regulator at all, Levinson said. Toulmin replied, yes. So if the PCC wasn't regulating the media, who was? Did the media drastically change, or did they just do enough to get people off their backs? With a different queen or a different future king, could there have been more pressure put on the media to actually reform? Overall, the British media bet on short-term memory, and they won.